Understanding the social impacts of tourism is vital to ensuring the sustainable management of the tourism industry. There are positive social impacts of tourism, demonstrating benefits to both the local community and the tourists. There are also negative social impacts of tourism. In the following articles, we will see what the most common social impacts are and how to mitigate them. First of all, we should understand what the term social tourism impact means. Simply put, the social tourism impact is the direct and indirect impact on visitors and the impact of interaction with tourism on the host community. This is also often referred to as socio-cultural impact. At its core, tourism is an interactive service. This means that the interaction between host and guest is inevitable. Tourism has many social benefits and shows a positive social impact. These might include protecting the local culture and heritage, strengthening communities, provision of social services, commercialization of culture and art, revitalize customs and art forms, preserve heritage, and so on. The negative social impact of tourism is unfortunately borne by the host community by a large amount of socio-cultural costs. These negative social effects include social change the value, increase crime and gambling, a change in moral behavior, changes in family structure and roles, tourism and host relations, and heritage destruction, and so on. Next, we will discuss social tourism impact mitigation strategies. How can we mitigate these effects?
My name is Nur Danida binti Taufik. My matric number is 270265. I will explain about the C irritations model. C irritations index, also known as Iridex model, and was created in 1976. This Iridex model was designed to measure a host population's perceptions of a tourist as destination develops over time. Iridex model is to assess the relationships or the interactions of the host and the tourist. There are 4 levels of the irritation stages and linked to the Butler tourist area life cycles. Each stage depends on the types of developments, number of tourists, tourist activities, and the extent of development planning. The 4 stages of C iridex are euphoria area, apathy, annoyance, and antagonism. The first stages of C iridex is euphoria area that occurs in early stage of Butler tourist area life cycle. The destination of this stage has a few of visitors and the tourism relatively are new to the locals. Locals are happy that tourists are interested in their destinations, and most of the locals are welcoming the tourists to their place. The situations between the host and the tourists are also good, and the existence of informal relationships between locals and tourists also occur. The level of euphoria example, such as the people are thrilled by tourist development. They welcome strangers and mutual feeling of satisfactions occur to the host. They want to interact with the tourists and extra helpful. It also an opportunity to the locals' business and also launch a money flow when tourists spend their money to support the local businesses. The visitors represent new revenues to the community, and the benefits clearly outweigh any drawbacks. Next stage of the C iridex index is apathy. As the destination starting to continue develop, the number of the tourists begin to increase year by year to the point where tourists are not a new thing and unusual. People begin to travel from another country to the other country. Time by time, the residents are not bothered by the tourists anymore, and they do not think that the tourists are cool. The relationships between the residents and the tourists become more informal. They do not interested to get to know or interact with the tourists anymore. The residents have lack of interest and concern toward the tourists. The visitors are taken for granted and the tourists are only seen as their sources. The residents and the guests begin to take each other for granted. Annoyance or irritation is the third level in the Doxy-Iridex model. At this point, the development has developed to the saturation point. The development of the attraction, facilities and services are occurring everywhere. As the tourism starting to become more famous and the number of the residents and the tourists become the same, the hosts started feel that they have to competing their resources with the tourists. Saturation is approached and the residents have misgiving. Planners attempt to control by increasing the infrastructure rather than limiting the growth. This continues over the development annoyed the locals and they started feel frustrated with the tourism industry and the tourists present while the tourists are having a positive economic impact. The level of irritations that the local feel are the local cannot handle the number without expansions of facilities. Industry is nearing the saturation point. Antagonism is occurring when development at tourist destinations is now only producing negative impact, especially toward the local. Host populations blame the tourists for all the negative impacts tourism has brought to the destination that had affected the host and the host environment. When tourists greatly outnumber the residents to the point that the local become antagonistic toward the tourists. As traffic, noise, populations and competing for the resources like facilities, residents starting openly protest tourism and clash to the guests. The resident populations angry at the tourists and express their anger toward them. The residents engage in rude behavior to the tourists and not friendly to the tourists at all. The irritations become more overt. People see the tourist as the indicator for all that is bad. Mutual politeness has now given way to antagonism and the tourist is ripped off. The final level of the host feeling is toward the existence of the tourists are resignations. All this while, people have forgotten that what they cherished in the first place was what gave the tourists. But the world scrambled to develop, they overlooked this and allowed the environment to change. The local tourism industry must learn that their ecosystem or their resources will never be the same anymore. If it is large enough to cope with the mass tourism, it will continue to thrive.
Hi, my name is Nolena Aisha bin Rusli. My metric number is 270557. Now, I will explain about negative social tourism impact. Okay, tourism development can bring many benefits to the economically, but can also bring disadvantages to the region. If the development often happens, it will be accompanied by the negative social impact. The negative social tourism impact for the first one is the social change. Social change is basically refer to the changes in the way that society behave. There are many examples throughout the world where the local population have changed because of the tourism. For example, they change how they speak and how they dress. Okay, the second one is the globalization and destruction of the preservation and heritage. Globalization is the way in which the world is becoming increasingly connected. That means we are losing our individuality and gaining a sense of global being, whereby we are more and more alike than ever before. Globalization is also inevitable in the tourism industry that because of the interaction between the tourists and the host, which typically come from the different geographic and cultural background, this interaction encourages us to become more alike. Next is culture clashes. This is because the tourism involves movement of people from a different geographical location. Culture clashes can take place as a result of a difference in culture, ethnic and religious group, values, lifestyle, language and level of prosperity. The attitude of the local resident toward the tourism development may unfold through the dozy stages. The culture clashes can also be frustrated by the fundamental differences in culture between the host and the tourists. Okay, last but not least is increase in crime and gambling. Crime rates typically increase with the growth and urbanization of an area, and the growth of the mass tourism is often accompanied by the increased crime. The existence of a large number of tourists with a lot of money to spend and often carrying valuable. For example, the accessory that the tourists wore will give an attraction to the criminal and will bring to their activities like a robbery. Gambling is also common occurring as a result of tourism. Growth on the casinos and the other gambling facilities can encourage not only the tourists to take part but also the local people. So in conclusion, there are many negative social impact of tourism, but the negative social impact can be mitigated or reduced by the effective use and the implementation. The first one is reducing the tourist number in the some area. Okay, to reduce the tourist number in the some area, the government or travel and tourism organization need to put the limitation to the number of tourists that were allowed to visit a specific area. Okay, the government should also double the entry fees. This way can help to control the number of the tourists and at the same time can maintain the income from this area. The limitation in the number of tourists also mean to reduce the impact on the ecosystem. Okay, next is focus on ecotourism. Government or travel and tourism organization can put an increased focus on ecotourism. This is because the ecotourism can help to preserve the wildlife and the environment. So at the same time, this also can help in reducing the social conflict between the authorities and other groups such as tribal people and farmers. The government or travel and tourism organization can also active the green tourism. The green tourism is not only placing an emphasis upon to protect the environment, but also involve the local people in making decisions that affect their lands and living. Green tourism can also improve the preservation and transmission of the cultural and historical tradition. It can also bring a chance to protect the local heritage or to revitalize the native culture, such as by regenerating the traditional arts and craft. Apart from that, the visitors can enjoy the unspoiled nature and landscape, environmental quality of goods or services.
Hi, my name is Yosidia. My train number is 270957. Now I want to present about the limit of acceptable change, LAC. The assessment of the limit of acceptable change consists of 9 stages. Limit of acceptable change is one of the methods used to limit the acceptable degree of change in the area due to various tourist activities and developments. LAC is also similar to the concept of carrying capacity, and its role is to protect tourist destinations from over-tourism developments without appropriate planning and methods. In addition, LACs focus on how many changes of acceptable and what strategies should be taken to prevent unacceptable effects. Therefore, we choose Venice as an example tourist destination using LAC. Venice is one of the most popular tourist destinations and located in northeastern Italy. The city is composed of 118 islands separated by canals and connected by bridges. We represent the 9 stages included to assess an average change in Venice. Step 1 is identify area issues and concerns. Stakeholders will understand the current problems facing the surrounding area and can take action as the next plan. Venice faces 3 main problems, and the first problem is over-tourism. Venice receives many tourists from all over the world every year, and this causes overcrowding. And the second problem is cruise issues. Cruise ship has an impact on the environment, such as environmental pollution, destroying the basic structure and ecosystem of Venice. And the third problem is local population decline. One of the reasons is that local residents have lost their accommodation. This is because the owner rents out accommodation to tourists, and some of them even increase the rents to make high profits. Besides that, local residents feel that they lost their lives and personal space, and in the end, they choose to leave their homelands. In the first step, some questions are provided so that the stakeholders can take some action against these questions when identifying the issues. So the first question is, what are the types of policies required? So the types of policies required is a comprehensive analysis policy. After that, the government should implement policy to control over tourism, and this implements the sustainable tourism policy. So the second question is, what are the regulations involved? The government should improve and strengthen the environmental and social protection regulations. The next question is, what are the planning requirements need to be consideration in order to make each alternative? So they should analyze each of the strengths and weaknesses of the alternatives, and this can help them to choose an appropriate alternative. So the fourth question is, who does what during the stage? Relevant authorities such as relevant researchers and experts play an important role in analyzing the impact of over-tourism. So the next question is how it's done during the stage. The government and relevant authorities cooperate to conduct a detailed analysis of the impact of over-tourism, and this can help them formulate and implement policy to solve the problem of over-tourism. The last question is, the roles of the public and private sectors must be defined and outlined clearly. For the public sector, the government of the Venice should implement all policy to solve the problem of over-tourism and in order to restore the impact of over-tourism. For the private sector, they can provide the funds and solutions and cooperate with the public sector to solve the problem of over-tourism. That's all from me. Thank you.
Good day, Doctor and fellow friends. My name is Chamayan with metric number 272010, and now I will continue with the part of LSC Step 2 until Step 9. Step 2 of LSC is to define or describe opportunity classes. In Venice, government and tourists are the opportunity classes, and both of them play the main role to reduce the gap between the change of environment. In case the Venice government has the right to control the amount of tourists coming by setting up law, while tourists have to respect local sites and residents without bringing problem to them. Step 3 is to select indicators of social conditions. In Venice, law is the main indicator, and tourist behavior can be controlled under it. According to research, punishment of fine around $27 to $550 have been set up to overcome tourist behavior in public. Here are some examples of tourist behavior which will face punishment of fine if they do it in public areas of Venice, such as lying on public benches, swimming in the canals, and attaching padlocks to bridges. Step 4 of LSC is inventory social conditions. The social problem happening in Venice is over-tourism, as tourists keep coming in with the continuous living of local residents. This social problem will keep on if the environment and the rights of residents do not be considered first. We can say that both the environment and residents are the inventory of Venice, and protective action should be taken. Step 5. Specific standards for social conditions. The problem in Venice is over-tourism, while tourists, travel agency, and the government have to take a part in protecting it. To reduce the harm to the city, tourists should learn about the local culture, while travel agency and the government should focus on city protection and conservation. Step 6. Identify alternative opportunity class allocations. Thousands of tourists are entering Venice by cruise ship, and this type of huge vehicle has polluted the lagoon of Venice. There's no doubt that the alternative plan like banning the entering of cruise ship should be taken by the Venice government. Step 7. Identify actions required for each alternative. Like what I stated before, the government has the responsibility to stop the over-tourism in Venice by banning the entering of cruise ships, so the following action should be taken by the government is to communicate with the cruise ship company as well as end the contract with them. Step 8. evaluate and select an alternative. In this case, if the Venice government comes up with other alternatives to stop over-tourism besides ending the contract with cruise ship companies, well, the government needs to evaluate and select the most relevant and put into practice. The last step of LSC is implement and monitor. This step refers to a social scheme should be implemented with the moment of the alternative carried out. Let's say the Venice government chose the alternative of banning the entering of cruise ships. The support of tourists and residents is also important besides the support of the government. Last but not least, LSC is one of the ways to protect tourism destinations from the harm of over-tourism. That's all from me. Thank you.
As this article proves, tourism has many social influences. Although some of the effects are positive, unfortunately they are negative. Doxy's irritation index, it happens all the time, almost associated with each development tourism community. From joy to indifference, to annoyance to confrontation. When people have forgotten that what they value most is what attracts tourists, they forget what it was like in the first place, and they start competing for development. They ignore that and allow the environment to change. The local tourism industry must realize that every move they make will change who they are, and gradual globalization may be the future of tourism. Globalization is how the world is increasingly connected. While we are losing our individuality and gaining a global feeling, we are becoming more and more alike. I don't think it's desirable, because the individual characteristics can't be forgotten. But when we travel, most tourists do want a familiar feeling. And globalization helps us do that. Now globalization is inevitable in the tourism industry, because the interaction between tourists and hosts often comes from different geographical and cultural backgrounds. It is this interaction that encourages us to become more similar. So everything has good effects and bad effects, and it depends on how you can alleviate them. This will help you to think carefully about how your actions might affect the local community you are visiting. Hopefully, it encourages deeper thinking about issues such as globalization.